In the winter of 1980, a young mechanic was found dead beneath a frozen bridge in rural Minnesota. His death ruled a drunken fall and quickly forgotten. The case gathered dust for decades until a quiet forensic chemist re-examined a few overlooked shards of glass. What she found, hidden deep in their chemical fingerprint, would reopen a 40-year-old mystery and prove that even the smallest fragment can remember what everyone else chose to forget. It began, as most stories of truth do, in the silence that follows certainty. In the winter of 1980, when the snow around the small town of Lanesboro turned the streets into pale rivers of light, the local police believed they had their answers. A body found near a bridge, a smashed bottle of cheap liquor, and the story everyone wanted to believe, a drunken accident. The stains on the asphalt, brown and frozen, were logged, photographed, and dismissed as remnants of a careless night. It was a time before the machines listened as closely as they do now. Back then, chemistry had rules, but not yet the patience of those who would one day inherit its quiet power. In a lab tucked behind the county building, where dust gathered on unused spectrometers and fluorescent lights hummed above beige tiles, a young forensic chemist named Evelyn Carr began her work. She was not the type to argue at meetings or push back when detectives rolled their eyes. She was quiet, methodical, and too often mistaken for shy. Her colleagues saw a technician. What she saw was pattern, residue, and trace, the whispers left behind when violence tries to disguise itself as chaos. The glass fragments from the scene had arrived in a brown envelope marked non-essential evidence. They were from the shattered bottle, or so the officers said. Evelyn logged them out anyway, placing them beneath the cool glow of the microscope. Most analysts would have glanced once, logged the basic refractive index, and moved on. But Evelyn noticed something. The edges weren't just sharp, they were warped. The color was slightly off, a pale tint, almost imperceptible, like the memory of smoke trapped in the material itself. She wrote a note to herself. Unusual hue variation, possible foreign inclusion? It should have ended there, but something about the glass stayed with her. The case file was thin, the photos grim. The victim, a 24-year-old mechanic named Joel Hastings, was found face down on the bridge, his coat torn, his skull fractured. No witnesses, no clear cause. The official line was accidental fall combined with intoxication. But Evelyn, staring at those glass shards under the weak light of the microscope, felt something she couldn't yet name. The quiet discomfort of a story that doesn't fit the evidence. She ran the basic density test, then the refractive index. Nothing unusual except the slight color anomaly. Still, she couldn't shake it. She stayed late that night, the hum of the spectrometer the only sound in the building. When she loaded one fragment into the holder and initiated a preliminary emission scan, the results were strange. Trace levels of chromium. A small spike of lead oxide inconsistent with common glass bottles. That combination suggested something manufactured for strength, not a liquor bottle, but safety glass. Her breath caught. Safety glass wasn't found in bottles, it was used in windshields. She rechecked the log. The detectives had noted no car at the scene, no skid marks, no broken headlights. They were sure Joel fell on his own. But if the glass came from a windshield, then someone's car had been there, and someone had cleaned up well. She marked her findings, but her supervisor brushed it off. He said, "Probably contamination, maybe from transport, it happens." But she knew contamination didn't lie that neatly. She couldn't prove it yet, not without running the fragments through more precise instrumentation, but she felt it. The shard had a story. Weeks passed, then months. The report was filed away. The town moved on. Evelyn stayed.
the kind of scientist whose loyalty was not to applause, but to truth itself. In the years that followed, the case faded into memory. She married once, divorced quietly, and continued her work, now at the State Lab in Minneapolis. Technology evolved. Instruments grew smaller, smarter, and far more sensitive. Spectroscopy, the art of listening to atoms, became her language. She trained herself to hear the difference between noise and confession. Then, 40 years later, when the Cold Case Unit reopened several files from the early 80s for digital archiving, one of the analysts, a young intern, mentioned the name Joel Hastings. Evelyn, now in her 60s, heard it in passing and froze. That bridge, that winter, those glass shards. She asked if the old samples had survived. They had. Dusty, sealed in outdated packaging, the labels fading but legible. She requested permission to re-examine them for educational comparison. The lab was quieter now. Automated machines, fewer people, more screens. But the hum was the same. That low electrical whisper she'd always associated with truth on the edge of discovery. She placed the ancient evidence on the bench, her gloved hands trembling slightly. Time had made her slower, but not duller. The shards were still there, ambered in age but intact. This time, she didn't just look, she listened. Using high-resolution, laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy, she scanned each shard, mapping its elemental composition down to parts per billion. The results appeared like constellations across the monitor, peaks of magnesium, silicon, and calcium, the ordinary voices of glass, but beneath them, a pattern emerged. Trace barium, titanium dioxide, and something else, a peculiar ratio of strontium to zinc too high for ordinary manufacturing. It matched a specific formulation used by a single auto manufacturer in 1979. The same year, Joel Hastings died. Her pulse quickened. The glass wasn't from a bottle. It was from a 1979 Dodge pickup windshield. And with that, the silence of 40 years began to tremble. She dug through the archived witness statements, now digitized. One man's name appeared repeatedly, Richard Kane, a neighbor, owner of a Dodge pickup, who claimed Joel had borrowed money from him before disappearing. Kane had left town soon after, citing job relocation. Evelyn cross-referenced DMV records. The truck had been sold to a scrapyard in Wisconsin. She reached out to the Cold Case Unit. "I think you might want to look into this," she said, attaching her spectral data. They thanked her politely. Weeks passed, with no response. Old habits die hard. Scientists still wait in silence while others decide what their truth is worth. But one afternoon, she received a call. A detective named Weller sounded excited, cautious, almost reverent. He said, "We ran your data through our materials database. You're right. The glass matches that model year exactly. We also pulled a partial paint fragment from the old evidence bag, same vehicle line. We found Kane's current address. He's alive, retired." Evelyn sat there, the years folding inward like paper. The old lab, the long nights, the dismissed reports, all of it converged into one point of vindication. When police visited Kane's home, he didn't deny it for long. Age had eroded the sharpness of his lies. He admitted there'd been an argument on the bridge. Money, anger, a shove. Joel fell, and in panic, Kane's truck struck the railing, scattering shards of his windshield over the ice. He'd cleaned the scene before anyone arrived. The so-called liquor bottle? Planted, to make it look like drunken misadventure. The confession was recorded, and the file closed. But the story didn't end there, not for Evelyn. That night, sitting alone in her office, she watched the spectral lines again. Each peak, each ratio, each pulse of light, all of it the language of persistence. Science had spoken, not loudly but steadily, waiting 40 years to be heard. It had always been there, patient and exact, whispering beneath the noise of human assumption. She realized then that science doesn't shout. It endures. It records what we overlook, holds it in silence, and waits for someone patient enough to listen. Spectroscopy had not just revealed a chemical fingerprint, it had revealed the endurance of truth itself. That even in decay, evidence remembers what we forget. That is what science is, she thinks. Not discovery, but endurance. The hum of the spectrometer still echoes in her ears, like the low note of an old hymn, steady, unwavering, eternal. And so the stain misunderstood in 1980 became at last the story understood by light.
Some truths take decades to find their voice. Evelyn Carr didn't set out to be a hero. She simply refused to stop listening when everyone else had moved on. 40 years, one forgotten sample, and a single beam of light proved that real science doesn't fade, it waits. If you believe every mystery leaves a trace, make sure you never miss the next one. Subscribe for more real investigations where persistence meets technology and where silence finally speaks. And remember, every click, every share, every listen helps bring hidden truths into the light. Because sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to stop asking what the evidence remembers. Subscribe, stay curious, keep listening.